What's going on, guys? Hey, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a vintage fragrance. I've heard it here and there. You know, vintage fragrance talk is not the most common in FragCom, but to collectors and a lot of men, well, I mean women too, actually. When you do hear about vintage rumblings, there is always somebody in the chat or something like that I've heard reference this fragrance. Well, lucky for you guys, I actually have the actual vintage juice. So this isn't a reformulation, and it is from the house of Halston. All right, so let's strap up and go for that ride. All right, welcome to the scent bubble. I am your host for the evening. Today, from the house of Halston, we have Z14. And I have a vendor that has a bunch of vintage bottles. So when they decant, they let you know what year the bottle was made. And it is confirmed that this is a vintage batch of it. Don't know what year. I don't know if they made multiple versions. So maybe there's only one vintage version of this juice. But Halston is quite known for some kind of classic men's scents from back in the day. I'll read you a little bit of an excerpt on it before we get into our initial impressions. So here we go. Origins and background. Halston Z14 is a classic men's cologne originally launched in the mid-70s, often cited somewhere between 74 and 76 during the height of Halston's brand influence in fashion and lifestyle. It was developed as part of the Halston fragrance line that extended the brand's luxury aesthetic beyond clothing and accessories. The scent was created by Vincent Marcello and Max Gavarry, perfumers known for rich aromatic compositions. So aromatic men's fragrances back then were very aromatic for the masculine category. During its early years, Z14 captured the vibe of the 1970s sophistication. Think Studio 54, nightlife, leather jackets, and warm evenings. Okay, I'm not going to read too much more into it. Just wanted to give a little bit of background info, especially when we're talking about vintage. And that also helps me to kind of prepare my nose for what I'm going to get into. Because sometimes you might react too emotionally to a fragrance initially, and that's kind of inappropriate when you're dealing with older scents or just different stuff that you need to kind of, it helps to prepare is what I'm saying. So 1 spray on the arm because this atomizer is quality, 2 on the strip, and so I'm expecting an aromatic men's oldie type of scent. Very rich. The top notes of this are just out there. Definitely smells old. Extremely fresh, aromatic outdoors. This is like old outdoors, but it's very rich. And sometimes the richness of a vintage fragrance, oftentimes in my experience, has kind of bleached out a fragrance, for lack of better words. Like the louder fragrances sometimes in the fougere category, this feels somewhat fougere, tend to have like a certain note or is packed with so many notes that it kind of just creates this bleached out singular bravado that is sometimes abrasive to really make out the nuance. So it kind of just comes across almost like a big bar of soap or like a big leafy green or something like that, and you don't get to enjoy the nuance. So I'm hoping this scent, though it has like a big green woody mossy blast, I really hope it chills down because it does feel like there's a lot going on in the background. Yeah, this is nice. You know, I'm not comparing here, but in terms of vibe check, you know, think Stetson, kind of that real staple man's bravado scent. I don't want to say Drakkar because Drakkar is more aftershavey, but definitely think, actually, I think Stetson is like a really good take. In fact, in an odd way, you think Dior's Eau Sauvage as like a bright green blast, a very 80s, 90s blast. This almost feels better than it because even though it smells a little bit older in style, It's fresher, lighter, and airier. And it dries down very nice. I think of soap, like Irish Spring soap, but a little bit greener. But then in the back, it has these like little citrus, little bit of like green outdoor spice, and then woodiness, like a cedar or something like that. Let's go ahead and switch screens here. Actually on skin, same thing. Gets a little bit more ambery. Feels like there's some kind of sweetness going on, like cinnamon or something like that. 4 out of 5 with 2,000 votes. So definitely, as far as vintage fragrances is concerned, you should get your nose on it. Especially if you're looking in the market for some kind of signature masculine scents. Cypress, lemon, bergamot, green notes, basil, gardenia. It's mostly this left side over here, this cypress lemon combo. Cinnamon, that's what I get. A tiny backbone of amber and cinnamon, just kind of coating and gluing a lot of these elements together. Vetiver, cedar, patchouli, coriander, geranium, jasmine, and then it dries down to a base of leather, oakmoss, benzoin, musk, amber, and tonka bean. Now, I'm pretty sure the fougere composition is oakmoss, coumarin, lavender, that type of thing. We don't have the lavender, but we definitely have the oakmoss. We don't have coumarin, but we have cinnamon, so that kind of replaces the spice factor, the coriander. And then it's got a very aromatic top. It's not necessarily lavender, but the green and citrus and even the basil notes and all that and the floral from the gardenia kind of is replacing that lavender, but still giving the same type of vibe with a little bit more emphasis on green than like a sweet, soft flower type of thing. I like it. It comes off very bar soapy, but the bar soap is very rich. There's depth and there's elegance. It's not mono note. In fact, I really love the dry down in comparison to the opening. I much more prefer the dry down to the opening. Yeah. What do I think about this? What are they comparing it to? Moderate performer. I don't know what concentration it is, but who cares? Italian Cypress from Tom Ford. Apex from Roja. A little bit of Florist, a little bit of Aramis. Polo Green. Alfred Sung. I have this one as well. I have a lot of these. Oh, that's good to know. Okay, let's go out. So here's the thing. Men's fragrance, year-round, outdoor daily driver, but as a daily driver, it's a man's scent. I don't really know if I can age park this because it's old manish, it's grown manish, and it's ambitious young manish, but it still has that vintage overtone of kind of just being this, I don't know, I feel like the 70s to the 90s kind of, they have these videos that play on Instagram and on TikTok of like back to the 1900 or back to 1990 or the 90s. Here's a 90s reflection time, or how do I explain this? It's like a playback reminiscent highlight video of things from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that only kids grown in that time period would know. So they'll show like an old Wendy's, an old McDonald's, an old shopping mall and stuff like that. And they'll play some real dreamy type of music. And this has that kind of backdrop on this fragrance where the profile just feels very 30, 40 years ago-ish, you know, something you might have smelled as a kid. But I will say this, for a vintage scent, this is kind of the type of scent where you know everybody wore this back in the day, but today, really you'd have to be a certain type of individual who maybe your dad wore something and this reminds you of your dad. Maybe you're an old soul and you don't like where perfumery is going today with all the sweetness and you just want to have something that's like a part of history, but is still wearable. I definitely think this is super wearable today. But if you're a young guy, you have to get a more modern version of this. So maybe the Italian Cypress from Tom Ford might be a better touch. But I mean, as a vintage fragrance, this is really nice. I find that a lot of the vintage fragrances that try to do this fail because it smells so old, but there's this lift of freshness to this musky, soapy green lift that really feels timeless but aged, aged in a barrel of cedar. Yeah, I think most of you men out there won't be interested in this. You've graduated from, if you're an old man, you've graduated from it. You'd only get it for nostalgia. As a mid-range to younger man, there's just so many other fragrances in this category, especially with houses like Amouage and stuff, where they're just taking this fougere category and really giving it a surreal take and taking it to new heights. But I would say this fragrance is for collectors who want a deep bag of versatility in their bag. This is for people who love to have history in a bottle. This is for people who, sometimes you lose a loved one like your dad or your uncle or something, and this fragrance reminds you of them, type of thing. So nostalgia, memorabilia, or history would be the reason you would own something like this. If you wanted a today's rendition of it, like the grandson of this in terms of today's version of fragrances like this, obviously the Tom Ford Italian Cypress, but you also have fragrances like L'Insoumis from Lalique. You have Eau Sauvage from Dior. You have newer fragrances such as Apex from Roja, Vetiver from Roja, these kind of sparkling green takes where smells like something just like this, but with such a modern champagne upgrade to them. And they're so much more cleaner and less reminiscent of the past. So if you want something in this realm, I think you go with like one of the green Acqua di Parmas, like Colonia Club. Again, Italian Cypress. If you want something more mass appealing versions of those, Roja, Vetiver, Apex. And if you want something vintage in this realm, your Polo Greens. What else in the vintage category do I think about with this? Really Polo Green, Stetson, stuff like that. But good scent, in today's world, it's very 6 or 7 out of 10-ish. It's a timeless masterpiece to me because in the 70s, this would have felt so refreshing. This would have been the scent you wanted to put on, going to work, when you got home, just the man's man. This is the man that works hard all day, comes home, has the family. He's the provider, the protector. And when he steps out just clean and refined, and he's on his way to something bigger and better in life and leaving a legacy behind. A very practical working man's type of fragrance, but still has the bells and whistles that men would have appreciated back then, to be able to take the fragrance from work into the household, into the date, whatever. It's just like the go-to tried and true veteran fragrance. So it's almost like in that regard, this fragrance is unrateable. One of the better green fragrances I've smelled, but again, it does have the nostalgia and the old factor to it. And it does take you to a place, kind of like an old department store smell. I think year round, but it leans colder weather to me. So it seems like a fall appropriate fragrance, or a fragrance in an environment with a breeze. This is a casual daily driver fragrance. I don't really think it's upscale. Back then it would have been upscale, but today's world, I think it's very casual. Natural man, not a sweet fragrance at all. Maybe a 1 or 2 out of 10 sweetness. This is pure outdoors, cabins, campgrounds, Boy Scouts meets the guy who drives the tractor, the guy with the bank teller with the briefcase in the 70s and 80s, the working class man. Sprays of this, I think, 4 to 6, and it'll take you probably throughout a shift. It seems like moderate performance. Hard to critique this. This review is more of an appreciation piece, to say that if you're into vintage or nostalgia and things like that, you definitely want to get your nose on it, because there's a freshness to it. There's a complexity to it. There's a history smell to it. and I'm really digging it. Now, granted, it's going to be very hard for you guys to get a vintage bottle of this like I have here. What can you get this for in the new formulations? Very cheap, actually. You can get it for 15 bucks. So what a cool way to go into the past. Now, again, I think these are modern reformulations on this. And I even think at some point it was a splash cologne. But yeah, you can get this fragrance. Here, take a look at this real quick, guys. So you can get this, 14 to 20-ish bucks. You can get gift sets that come with, shower gels and stuff. I don't really think that's appropriate. That's not necessary. It's already a pungent smell. But yeah, so it looks like this is kind of like OG. It's kind of a goat vintage fragrance, a lot of high ratings. Definitely get your nose on it, but only if you're into nostalgia and stuff. Sometimes there's vintage fragrances that are timeless. I don't feel like this is timeless. I just think that if you wanted to go back to the past and bring it back today, it's a good fragrance to kind of bring back, but I don't think it's timeless. Like, people today that smell this won't be fond of it at all. If it's like your first time smelling stuff like this, it's abrasive. It's not modern. It has kind of an aged old smell to it. But I'm sure that men who are familiar with Dracars and Stetsons and Halstons and all that stuff would really back this and say it's a timeless masterpiece. But I think for most of the world, you'll give it like a 6 or a 7 at best. And that, I think I'm being gracious there. But if you're into history and stuff like that, definitely get your nose on it. Let's go back out here. I don't think I left anything else out. Again, this was Halston's Z14 vintage version. Maybe you guys can see this on the bottle. Will it actually focus? There you go. And I enjoyed this. This is really nice. I don't need a bottle of it even for 15 bucks because I got a lot of vintage stuff like it. But, maybe maybe we'll throw it in the collection just to say we did at some point in time. But this is just a look into the past. It's like going to a museum. Once you see the exhibit, you don't really need to come back and see it again. But some guys really swear by this in conversation from stuff that I've interacted with. But anyways, Halston Z14, decent fragrance. In my eyes, it's a 7 in today's world. And I think I'm being quite gracious, but I don't think it's anything you need to get your nose on unless you're into that type of thing. Like, comment, subscribe. More importantly, turn on that notification bell. Talk to me. I do talk back. What vintage fragrances are you guys into that you guys want to see on the channel, or that... Put it this way, are there any vintage fragrances, both men and women, that you guys wear that you just feel are either timeless or nostalgic, either one, but old fragrances before the 2000s that you say, look, for whatever reason, I have to wear it. Tell me what the fragrance is and why you wear it, whether it brings back a memory or you just think it's timeless. Let's get the conversation going in the comments below. And until next time, thank you guys so much. Hope you have a blessed rest of your week. I'm going to throw 2 videos up as usual based off what you've been searching for. And until next time, you guys have a blessed rest of your week. Peace.